Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. If everyone can have their seats, that'd be appreciated. We have a truncated meeting today, so I want to make sure we jump right into it. Member Ramos, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today, we have, of course, myself, Chair of the committee, representing the 4th District, Councilman Burnett, representing the 8th District, Councilman Cohen, representing the 1st District, and Councilwoman Ramos, representing the 14th District. Councilman Glover is under the weather today, and so won't be attending us this meeting in person, and we will see if our other members are able to make it. Representing the Office of the President, I've got Sophia G., thank you. And representing the Office of the President, I've got Preston. All right. So this afternoon, the committee will have a hearing on legislative oversight, LO 21-0006, Quarterly Crime Stats and Violence Prevention Plan, for the purpose of the committee holding a hearing quarterly to review crime statistics for the police department and to monitor the progress of the biennial violence prevention plan. This bill was introduced on March 8th, 2021, and it was sponsored by myself. And I'll try to keep this brief because we have a truncated meeting today in light of the council meeting to come right after this. It is no surprise to anyone here that folks are frustrated with the current state of violence here in the city, and not just violence, but crime generally. It's an issue that we've been dealing with for a very long time, and I think we all have hope that we can see a change. And we've had some successes and certainly some failures over my tenure in the last 2 years, and during the tenures of all the folks here in this room. The past 2 weeks have been especially tough, certainly in my district, following the murder of a young woman, a 19-year-old who was pregnant, Jamira Burrell, and a number of other issues that I've seen in my district and across the city, which we're all familiar with, so I won't belabor those issues. I know we have plans. We're trying to carry out those plans. I have some concerns, which I've been very transparent about the capacity of our department to meet those needs for those plans, specifically GVRS and our ability to expand across the city. And some of the decisions that we've made recently, just making sure that we have transparency about the logic behind those decisions and where we're headed. So looking to get into a little bit of that today. We had to move this meeting from our traditional slot on Wednesday. We intended to have this meeting, in fact, last week, but weren't able to do that as well. So this is going to be our last meeting for the year. So I want to have an opportunity to go quickly through our presentations, noting that this is going to be a truncated meeting and it's going to also be our last meeting for the year. So I ask that both the police department and Monty take 15 minutes to go through their presentation so that we can allot enough time for questions and responses. With that, I'll turn it over to the police department. You can start your 15 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, all the members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be before you again. Today, you're going to hear from one of our deputy commissioners, Deputy Commissioner Worley, about crime and the statistics that we talked about. We will be happy to answer any questions about that. Then you will hear from Deputy Commissioner Melanson about where we are with our progress with the consent decree. And so I don't have any long opening remarks other than to wish you all happy holidays. And my entire executive team is joining us today, and we are prepared not only to discuss, but to answer any questions that you might have. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Worley.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to basically start off with our presentation. We're going to go over the clearance rates for our homicides, non-fatal shootings. You see homicide, actually today it has changed, just up over 38% today. Those change periodically as we close cases and we move into new cases, but it's up to 38% today. Non-fatal shootings are at 22, even though they've come down the last few weeks, they are going up because of some things that we implemented in patrol. So those are on the uptick. Robberies were pretty close to the national average, even though it's not quite what we have had in the past. And then burglaries were right about the national average, a little bit higher, and then rapes were at 22%. compared to the national average of 32%. Next, we're going to talk about the significant arrests. The big one is the handguns, 1,542 handguns arrests to date. We've already recovered 452 ghost guns. Last year, we only recovered about 330, so we're already over 100 more ghost guns recovered this year. The arrests, 710, even though that's not a significant number, it is an increase from the previous year, which probably is the first increase we've seen in CDS arrests in many years. Robberies at 463, attempt murders at 193, and murder at 112. And then here we are a little bit more of a breakdown of our gun arrests. Patrol gun arrests, the majority of them are from patrol, up 20%. Overall gun arrests up 20%, and then the non-patrol arrests are up 7%. And then next slide is going to have a lot of different numbers. I'm not going to go over those, I think, unless you want me to go over each one. I think we can.
Can you just allow us to take a look
Sure.
at it?
Yes, sir.
And for members of the committee, we can, when we get into questions, we might just ask that you leave this up. I think there's a lot of useful information here.
Yes, sir.
If you guys are ready to go, we can allow them to continue. Please, go ahead.
All right, we jump to the next slide. This basically breaks down the homicide comparison in each district through the different years. As you can see, a couple districts have pretty good increase. The Northeast, you see, has a big increase, but yet last year in the Northeast was an anomaly. I was there for 3 years as a commander, and 20 homicides is outstanding in a district, but you can see they're they're pretty close to their average. If you would have went back a little further, you'd have saw the averages were up in around 50 for previous years before that. And then the rest of them, you can see the Central is doing extremely well, down over 50%, and a couple other ones are doing well. The Western, which is where we started the program, the GVRS, they were at 52 last year. They're at 32 this year, so exceptional decreases there. And then non-fatal shooting, same thing. You could jump right to the Western, see another significant increase. I think it's about 33% down compared to last year in the Western District. And then the domestic violence, the good thing with this, domestic and youth violence, you can see the homicides are down 45%. For the most part, almost every category is down compared to the previous year in the domestic violence. In the youth violence, unfortunately, it's gone up because we seem to talk about this almost every day, about some of the incidents that our young men and women are committing, the crimes they're committing. And unfortunately, we seem to run into the same ones repeatedly throughout the year. And with that said, that's my part, and I'll turn it over to DC Melanson.
Thank you, CDC Worley. So Eric Melanson from the Compliance Bureau. I've got with me several members of my leadership team as well, who help head up all the different aspects of the Compliance Bureau. So I've got Major Holman and Captain Brown here from Performance Standards. They help with audits and inspections. This is a critical component to ensuring we're marrying up with the monitoring team's expectations on being able to be a self-assessing, self-correcting model. Director Sullivan, Shannon Sullivan's the Consent Decree Implementation Unit Director. That's, pedal to the metal, making sure we're building policies and building training so that we can implement them throughout the department. That training is administered through the Education and Training Division. That's headed up by Commander Loeffler, who's here with us. I've also got Captain Alicia White, who's in my office. And did I leave anybody out from compliance? Is that everybody? I think that's good. All right, thank you all. So this team is helping to really push the ball forward when it comes to progress. We wanted to give you a status update on what that progress looks like as of this year. This is information that we've been sharing with the federal court. In our recent public hearing that we've had, we started to show these to the public, and we wanted to bring them to the council for their attention. The focus is moving into an assessment phase, and we need to move with it. because the consent decree is not just about policy and training, it's about assessing whether the training is having the outcomes that we need to have. And that is to ensure we're building better relationships with the community, that our officers are comporting with the expectations under the decree, but also making sure they're being effective community ambassadors for the public. And so that is all the pieces that lend itself to those assessments to ensuring we're getting the outcomes that we want, not just that we're checking boxes and building policy. So as we go through this agenda, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the activities that our monitoring team is working on and what's to come in the upcoming year. So the Global Four, this is a term of art that we've been using for the last several years. It focuses on our training piece, our technology needs, our staffing requirements, our public integrity side. Those are the big four topics we've constantly been talking about that are brought up every month in court, every quarterly hearing that's with the public, with the federal court. But now the judge has made it clear that there's a fifth topic that there needs to be brought forward every time, and that's the assessments phase. Thanks, sir. So where are we? This is a constant question we're asked, and we're hoping to start to use this visualization to help explain to members of the public just exactly where we are. And so there are several stages of ratings that are provided by our monitoring team. And this is done paragraph by paragraph, section by section throughout the decree. And of the 460 plus paragraphs that are under review, each is assigned a score, whether it's something that has yet to reach the policy phase or move into the training phase, or whether something's been implemented and now is entering into that assessment phase. So if you look here in the green, there are really two categories that are most important to showing where we are as a department, and that's with the initial compliance phase and the on-track phase. These are areas where we have implemented the reform that is asked of us, and 83% of all paragraphs in the decree have either reached initial compliance or the on-track phase. And so we're at a place now where we're going through it section by section. Next slide. And so this information is broken out by sections. Not every section of the decree is created equal. As you can see, there are more paragraphs for things related to use of force, stop searches and arrests, supervision, misconduct, behavioral health. And again, each of these is a valuable and important topic that we're focused in on, but ensuring that we are putting our focus on the areas in red and yellow so that we can get them to green and then ultimately get the green into sustained compliance. It's a systemic way of ensuring that we are holding ourselves accountable and working with the monitoring team to know where exactly we are in achieving the policy reforms that are needed. And so to get an idea of where we are, the next slide shows the same information, but more on a percentage basis. It's kind of like a health meter, right? And so when you look at every section, it tells you just how far you've come within that section, as though it were equal to other sections. But again, not every section is created equal. Not every paragraph is even created equal. It takes a lot of effort and energy to get over the hump for some of these. That's why some are still in red. And as the monitors conclude their investigations, conclude their assessments on the progress that we've made, some of these are subject to change to, hopefully improve. But if there are areas that we need to go back and revise, we're working in conjunction with them and the Department of Justice to know exactly where the goalposts are so that we can, achieve those together and, again, provide the outcome that's necessary. And so what's coming up and what we're doing? So we are a self-assessing, self-correcting agency. That is the thread and the model that we are building at the BPD. And for us, that means building out assessments, audits, and reports that we're doing ourselves. So things like behavioral health forms and understanding whether or not we're releasing anybody without any charge ever having done. That indicates that some piece of the puzzle was not fully fleshed out, or whether that there was a piece of the puzzle that was missing for the final result to end up having a charge sustained on an individual that we arrest. These are things that we check on a regular basis, and we report out to our monitoring team on a regular basis. We're doing a supervision assessment, we're doing First Amendment protected activity assessments, use of force, body-worn camera audits. These are all part of the DNA of what the performance standards section is doing right now. And again, it's building that self-correcting, self-assessing model that lends itself to this new culture. And then the monitoring team is doing the assessments that lend itself to the scorecards you saw previously. And so what's coming up is these comprehensive assessments that look at the consent decree globally, but also specific assessments into specific sections of the decrees that are outlined. And that includes things like arrests, officer safety and wellness, use of force, sexual assault investigations, and behavioral health assessments. So we're looking forward to working with them, providing all the information that's needed to them, for them to complete their audits so that we can get these scores updated, so we can know where we are, and again, make sure that we are staying on track for the progress that we're expected to achieve, and on a strict timeline and strict guideline. We're not going to be in this forever. We are looking at finding an exit to the consent decree ultimately, and that means building a path forward on how that assessment phase lends itself to that exit. Next slide. And so we need the engagement from the public on this. So we continue to advocate for folks who want to provide public comment on policy and training. There are several workshops that we undertake with the public to ensure that we're looking at training and policy together with a publicly minded lens. Again, community meetings, the quarterly public hearings with the federal court. We invite all of you to participate in those and have your staff participate in those because they provide a lens into that status update on where we are, so that it lends itself to that information being fully transparent. And we can also conduct surveys. And I would encourage anyone to go to the baltimorepolice.org website/transparency. All of this information is there, all of our reports, all of our policies, and the ability to comment on those policies and training exists in that portal. And finally, what's to come? So in the upcoming year, we're looking forward to having our next monitoring year plan. The early intervention system, this is an RFP that's about to go out for public bid. We should be seeing that by the end of the week. And that's encouraging for us to be able to thread together all of the different systems that we have so that we can see and understand the activity of an officer and get in front of any concerning or problematic behavior before it manifests itself as a potential misconduct. So it allows us to be able to monitor and understand what's going on with that officer. Are they comporting with the expectations compared to their colleagues? And make certain that we can get a systemic and data-driven way of approaching those officers and ensuring that we're giving the right focus for them to not engage in any issues down the road. Case management. This is an issue that's plagued us for 2 decades. If those are familiar with the Lotus Notes system, if you've heard of it, it's the antiquated system for how we handle and manage our case files. We are on path to have a new case management built in the coming year. And so that is a huge step forward for us to be able to get out of those old systems. It will be fully integrated with our new records management system. And so for us, that's a big leap forward that's definitely necessary, not just for the benefit of our officers and our detectives, but for the consent decree compliance as well. And then we're moving into more informational videos about how to engage the Public Integrity Bureau, how can a member file a complaint, making sure that they're fully aware on the resources that are available for those that are subject to any kind of concerns about potential misconduct from officers. And we're putting out that information in both English and Spanish and other languages to make sure that there's more than just one path of understanding for that. And then finally, we're moving into a complaint mediation program that we're looking to try to build toward the end of next year. And that is designed to help be an alternative path to help mitigate these issues directly with those that are complaining with the department about potential misconduct, to hopefully provide a path of resolution and mediation and conflict resolution that doesn't just end in a potential disciplinary charge, but provides a different path of fixing the issue. This is also part of a requirement in our decree, and so we're excited to be able to build that as we go forward. So that's the quick hits on this. We're happy to answer any questions that you all may have. For us, again, my team is here, and I'll pause here to see if there's any other items that you may have questions on, or turn it back to the commissioner if he has any comments.
Commissioner, thank you. What we'll do is we'll go through the presentations and allow questions for both departments at the end. So what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Director Jackson, and we can start your 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy holidays to you and members of the committee. While Monty's provided you all with a full comprehensive update for 2022 to honor the time commitment that we'll meet, we'll be jumping around some of these slides a bit to provide the appropriate level of update. So when we're ready, we'll advance to slide number 6. Thank you. This slide demonstrates the entirety of MONSE's portfolio. That includes gun violence prevention, victim services, policy and research, and community engagement and opportunity in our role to deliver to the mayor's comprehensive violence prevention plan. Within the gun violence prevention lane, MONSE is responsible for managing and overseeing the group violence reduction strategy, which we know has successfully piloted in the Western, and through 12/12, we've seen a 35% reduction of homicides and non-fatal shootings collectively. We are also responsible for the oversight of the development of the mayor's CVI ecosystem, which not only involves safe streets, but also hospital violence intervention programming and school-based intervention, along with other components. In the victim services space, for the first time ever, a city agency owning a gunshot survivor victim services, and that is something that we have begun to roll out case management around and direct service provision and referrals to other community-based partners on. In that space, we also are responsible for direct service for intimate partner violence. We operate the Baltimore City Visitation Center, and we manage anti-human trafficking and sexual assault response. For policy and research, this agency is responsible for serving as the supporting mechanism for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, not only for Baltimore City, but also as it relates to our local, state, and federal agency partners. In the coming months, we will be producing the first ever public safety accountability dashboard that has come out of the work of that committee. And in the past few months, we've already delivered to this council and then publicly GVRS stat, which is the key performance indicators that we are using to measure the success of the group violence reduction strategy, and we have rolled out IPV stat. I'm gonna advance to next slide here. Won't spend a lot of time talking about the work that we did last year, but really talking about what we've done in this fiscal year and what we'll continue to do through the end of the fiscal year. Really revolves around making sure that we're growing the CVI ecosystem well in Baltimore City in ways that afford the opportunity for us to expand and streamline victim services, that we are standing up a robust re-entry program, not only for folks who are currently incarcerated, but those who have been previously incarcerated, and that we continue to manage the group violence reduction strategy work as it scales across the entirety of the city. Next slide. One of the other very critical commitments that we made as an agency to Baltimore City is that we were going to make sure that you all could hold us accountable for the work that we were doing. And as such, for the first time ever, created a case management system that would allow not only MONSE as an agency to do that, but would allow us to partner with community-based organizations who would be providing us with their case management information where we're funding them dollars to roll back into the system. We have taken care of fully forming our data team. As I mentioned before, we've produced GVRS stat and IPV stat, and through a grant that we just received from the ABLE Foundation, we will be hiring an incoming warrants analyst who will be working with us and in partnership with BPD and the incoming Sheriff's Department to try to reduce this backlog of over 43,000 open warrants in Baltimore City. The screenshots that you see there are the beginnings of other components of the data management system that we are capturing, and you'll see that there is a sophisticated level of detail associated with the data that we are looking to capture for our flagship program, Safe Streets, in addition to other areas that we're piloting, like the Coordinated Neighborhood Stabilization Response. Next slide. So in talking about our major activities for this calendar year, we've already talked about GVRS, and we'll get into a bit more detail about that in a second. We have secured commitments from all of our major hospital systems with regard to the creation of hospital violence intervention programs. We are providing stronger oversight to Safe Streets and stronger support, quite frankly. And we are in the final phases of working with Baltimore City Public Schools in planning the violence intervention work that will be happening in Mervo, Carver, and Digital Harbor. Sidestep is the city's first ever pre-arrest youth diversion program, and that program has been piloting in the Western. We are about to evaluate that work so that we can prepare that for scale across the entirety of the city, in hopes that we will be less likely to introduce our young folks to the criminal justice system when it's not necessary. We continue our partnership with BPD and other agencies around neighborhood policing plans in the greater Baybrook neighborhood and in Fayette Street outreach. By the end of the year, we will have managed and activated 8 coordinated neighborhood stabilization responses. Those are really about 5 activating events. When we see a juvenile be a gunshot victim or a homicide victim, where we see a major law enforcement takedown, where we see a mass shooting, where we see what we consider an accelerated violence response, similar to what we've just seen in Park Heights over the past few days. And then last but not least, having provided funding to the tune of $26 million through our ARPA portfolio, but most recently making sure that we're being really thoughtful about the social emotional development and the trauma-informed care components of the work that we are charged with doing. And then just the last few slides here. A lot of questions get asked about this dual integrated gun violence strategy that we are employing, and we thought that it made sense to share a visual around what this looks like, because while GVRS and CVI are 2 very distinct approaches, they are integrated approaches, and in the coming year, this integration is going to become clearer and clearer. So GVRS brings community moral voice and wraparound supports and life coaching to partner with law enforcement, and CVI brings all of the components that you see on the right side along with the ones in the middle together. Here is where the bridge lies in the middle, and we're gonna be really excited to share down the road what that integration looks like. So speaking specifically about GVRS, won't spend a lot of time on this first slide, but we'll share that we have made 135 direct communication referrals, and of that 135 referrals, 71 folks have accepted those services, and we've made 83 arrests in partnership with, obviously, BPD's making the arrests, but those arrests are arrests that were made by the gun violence unit. Next slide. This slide shows a district over district comparison through 12/12 that demonstrates that we have seen 53 fewer people be shot either fatally or non-fatally in the Western District, with the Western District being down 35.6%. I'm often asked, and I think I was asked just yesterday, if the Western District has been historically the most chronically violent district in the city, and you're seeing such significant reductions, why are we not seeing that have such a greater impact on Baltimore City? And I think while the answer is complicated, these statistics kind of help answer it. If we look at the Northeastern District, that district is up 89.4%, having 59 more homicides this year, as are other districts. We're also seeing the Central District and the Southwestern District be down. We believe that that is a combination of great police work, of the intelligence center that we know that we have in the Central District, but also a diffusion of benefits associated with those districts being on the periphery of the Western District. The last point that I'll make here is that each one of these districts makes up a certain percentage of the pie, if you will, around relative gun violence distribution in our city. And so all of those things account for why us seeing the Western District be down 35% wouldn't necessarily translate into the city being down 35%. We'll jump ahead here to our district comparison slide, because there are also some questions around the order in which we'll be scaling up GVRS. Let's advance one more, a couple more here. This one here is great. So there are a whole host of factors that led to our technical advisors' recommendations, ultimately the police commissioners and the DCOs, and my conversations around what was going to make sense around not outstripping current capacities, around making sure that we were moving into districts that had group violence issues, and that those group violence issues were interconnected with the districts in which the violence is already occurring. And so while this looks really busy, what it is a demonstration of those considerations. From an infrastructure perspective, we know how critically important it is to make sure that we've got Baltimore Community Intelligence Centers moving into the districts that we need to move into, that we've got to make sure that there is some group violence issues that is interconnected with the Western District, and as you can see, the Southwestern District and the Central District rank number 1 and number 2. If you look at that last column on your right, that rank IBIS link in the Western District refers to ballistic matches cross-district. And happy to answer more questions specific to the rationale around these decisions. You'll also see that as we look at capacities, and the police commissioner can talk about this a bit more in the Q&A, we also wanted to, as I made the point earlier, make sure that we didn't outstrip current capacities. And so looking at districts where we saw 2 or more district action teams also contributed to the decision-making here. Next slide. And this will be the last slide that I share. This demonstrates the sequenced expansion that will be happening for GVRS, given the redistricting of BPD districts that we know will go into effect next year. Western District will make up about 15% of the city's total gun violence. Stepping into Q1 and Q2 of next year, moving into the Southwestern District and the Central District. The Southwestern District is going to be accounting for 16% of total citywide homicides and non-fatal shootings after redistricting. Bringing the Western, Southwestern, and Central together because of the infrastructure supports that are in place to account for not outstripping capacities and the adjacency of these districts to each other, combined with the fact that they account for about 40% of our city's gun violence, means that we will be able to attack approximately 40% of the gun violence in our city. And then stepping into the subsequent districts, going into the Central gives us a great pathway to moving into the Eastern District, while simultaneously working with state and local partners to ensure that the balance of the districts that don't have Baltimore Community Intelligence Centers actually get the funding to build those, the capital dollars necessary to make sure that the infrastructure is in place for this strategy to be successful. I will close here, and I am happy to answer any questions that you or members of the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Jackson. I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I've got 2 of my own, and I ask for the sake of brevity, just given the shortness of this meeting, we typically have much more time, that the answers are to the point. And likewise for my colleagues, the questions, keep them to the point. My first question is mostly noting in light of where we are, and I'm going to focus specifically on homicides and shootings for the year. We are, as of our XM report, and I could go back into the presentation, but I'll just work from the latest XM report, which goes through 12/10. We were down 1 homicide compared to last year and up 4 shootings. The way I sort of see that is we are essentially stagnant from last year. I agree we have seen success with the GVRS model. I have questions about its pull on our resources. Please. And so my first question is we have 40 officers helping us roll out GVRS in the Western District. Where did those officers come from? What units did we pull them off of?
Great question. Let me first, I think in the numbers, we're actually +1 for homicides, not -1.
Thank you.
And -6 for non-fatal shootings.
Okay.
We created the group violence unit and opened it up to a fair, open, competitive process where members of the agency from all over the agency actually applied to be members of the group violence unit, and they came from a number of areas. They came from district action teams, investigative units, homicide, all over the department. And then we put all of them through training. And though there has been some attrition, we have backfilled that number. So the original group, and the majority of them actually came from our major case narcotics squad, which was converted to the group violence unit because they were already doing narcotics investigations and group investigations. So it was the conversion of the major case narcotics unit initially, and then we then opened it up, and other members from around the department applied to be part of it and came to that unit.
Thank you. And I asked that question because I know it was pretty hard to fill that unit. We're looking at some of our most elite officers with the highest levels of integrity, greatest experience. We wanted to make sure we got the best of the best for this unit. Does that create a vacuum for the rest of the city? Noting that we have seen a 35% reduction in combined homicides and shootings, does that stop us from being able to serve the rest of the city effectively? I note one of the slides that Director Jackson put up noted the increases in other districts, most notably the Northeastern District. If you could just answer that question.
In my opinion, it does not. The original creation of the unit, the majority, and correct me if I'm wrong, the majority was the conversion of the major case narcotics unit, which was already in existence doing similar work. And so it was retooled, it was retitled, and refocused to do GVU work, which is almost the same work that they were already doing. Then we added some capacity to it by opening it up for a few other people to join, and then we interviewed, and those folks, as we do with all specialized units, competed against each other to apply and got ranked and were selected to be that. In scaling, it does not mean that we are creating a 1-for-1 ratio. For example, if there are 36 people in GVU now, it doesn't mean that when we move to another district, we have to create 36 more sworn people. That is not what is happening. What we're doing, we are retooling what already exists in another district, and it is the conversion of folk that are doing similar work that will take on some of the GVU responsibility. We will replicate what is already happening in Western, like the shooting reviews, to ensure that the shooting review is done in the next district like it is done in the Western, that there's a dedicated intelligence analyst, an intelligence officer, and an intelligence officer and a data analyst assigned specifically to the district. So it is not increasing the staffing on a 1-to-1 ratio, not even on a 5 or 10-to-1 ratio, but it's converting what already exists and replicating the practices that exist in Western to make sure that they are now existing and operating the same way in Southwest and in Central, and then as we move on across the city.
Maybe I'll be more pointed for the 36 or 40. I know it's a fluctuating number as people come and go from that unit. For the folks that did join that unit and came from other units, have they been replaced? Have they been replaced with similar quality? Where did that quality of officer come from? Where do you pull in order to fill that unit?
So some of them have been replaced, and as we looked at the staffing model, we had to do a realignment across all districts. And because we were seeing the attrition what it was, the recruitment what it was, the staffing had to be realigned. So every district, when we realigned, got the same number of members for its district action teams. Excuse me. And every district got the same number of teams. While some have 2 and some have 1, when we realigned, everybody had the same thing, considering that we had to do this and create this unit. It did not create a vacuum, but we did levelize across all 9 districts when we did that. With the redistricting process, it is about doing the same thing, making sure that we levelize the work across all 9 districts. In scaling now, we want to make sure we don't, as you heard the director say, we don't want to strip resources and strip capacity, but rather convert what already exists to do some of the work and replicate. And so it was very important to look at what districts already had in making the decision where to scale, because the data actually told us where to go. Then looking at who had capacity like a BSIT, multiple DAT teams, and so now we can convert some of that, and at some point there will be some additions, but it's not taking away from anybody.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And it's probably pretty clear why I asked that question. In order to staff up this project, this pilot, either we change the way we operate or we pull additional resources in order to operate better in the Western District. So to that end, if you'll hear me.
There are some civilian capacity that we are working very hard, very fast to add to it that will help. At some point, obviously, there will always be the question asked and will have to be answered, do we need to add people to it, either because of attrition or through promotion? And so as people leave the agency or promote higher in the agency and do different types of work, yes, we have to inevitably replace those folks, and yes, and we do.
Yeah, I ask those questions primarily because as we get down to figuring out what it takes to scale, knowing we want to do that in 2 to 3 years, we're going to need more people with high integrity, high experience, high intelligence. Have some concerns about our ability to meet that need across the city if it requires specialized units, or if we can absorb it into just changing the way we do operations. That's one conversation. But if we need new units or specialized units, that's not changing operations, it's adding a focus. So I just want to get on because I know my colleagues have questions and I want to make sure we get through everything. I have one more question about the pilot in the Western District and specifically around the impact for the rest of the city. Do you guys believe that there has been a displacement of crime as a result of the pilot?
I'll start, and maybe the director would want to add something. Evidence supports, and this is from our technical advisors and research professionals that help us, evidence supports that there has not been any displacement. Because we did the pilot in Western, there has not been any displacement. It has not created an increase of criminal violent activity and shootings and murders in other districts. You want to answer that?
We just saw a slide, Director, that you put up that showed an 89% increase in the Northeastern District. I'm curious how we got to the conclusion that there is no displacement when in almost every other district that is not immediately associated with the Western District, we're seeing an increase.
Well, before she answers, I will say that there are multiple types of violent acts. There are multiple types of shootings that happen for multiple reasons. Likewise with homicides, they're not all going to be group violence related. Many of them in some other districts are domestic and are intimate partner and are known associate that have nothing to do with group or gang violence. And so there's a distinction between what's group and gang violence and being displaced for other group gang violence and the other types of motive for shootings and murders that exist that will give the explanation for why there's an increase in other shootings and murders in other districts, but they are not always tied to the group violence. Okay. There are different motives. Many of them are just known acquaintances, and because these things happen in two ways. They're either crime of passion, where two people become in the heat of the moment and the violence escalates to a fatal incident, or crime of premeditation, where people seek out the person they want to harm, neither of which can be predicted. But we can know where they happen historically and deploy to it, and then do all the things that you see the city doing now to change the way people think about why they make those decisions.
In addition to the points that the PC just made about violence not always being associated with groups, and that this specific strategy is focusing on group-involved individuals, the police commissioner and I, very early on during this pilot, asked our technical advisors through the University of Pennsylvania's Crime and Justice Policy Lab to start to look at whether or not displacement was happening. There is a report that is published on MONSE's website that indicates that this team found no evidence of displacement, and that this finding is consistent with the broader research around this strategy. They conducted 4 different types of analysis, and I'm not going to get into the details of the types of analysis, but want to share what those were. They reviewed all subsequent arrests for GVRS referrals, cross-district. They had a focus group with BPD intelligence and proactive enforcement officers on group behaviors. They reviewed homicide and shooting incidents in neighboring districts to determine connectivity, and they reviewed any changes in our NIBIN matches between 2021 and 2022. And in the completion of performing all of those analyses, determined that there was no presence of spatial displacement associated with this strategy.
So I appreciate that piece. The numbers don't suggest that. And if the numbers don't suggest that, it tells me one of two things. Whatever resources we were putting into our other districts, I'm not sure if we, for instance, reduced resources in the Northeastern District, but if we did, and we now see an 89% increase in homicides and shootings in the Northeastern District, maybe we didn't displace crime, but maybe our ability to respond to violent crime in the Northeastern District is just a little bit less. And so I'm not saying that research is wrong. I'd have to read the study, and if you could please share that with me, that'd be incredibly helpful. But I have a lot of trouble believing that despite the success that we've seen in the Western District, and I do believe in the program, that everything else is fine, because it's not.
Well, let's be clear. None of us think it's fine.
Okay.
We all are troubled by what we see with homicide, so I don't want anybody to put words in our mouth.
I'm not suggesting.
None of us are.
I'll take that back, Commissioner, because I don't want
Thank you.
that to be misconstrued. Not that things are fine, but that we would be in exactly the same place regardless of what had happened in other parts of the
Well,
city.
I will try to repeat what our research experts would have said or has said to us and would say if they were here. That when they say that there's no evidence of displacement, he actually went on to say that had we not had group violence reduction strategy, we would have seen a much, much larger increase in group violence related shootings. So while there are increases in shootings, there are not increases in group violence related shootings. There are increases in individual shootings where two people, one shot the other or one killed the other. But that's not always tied to group violence. There are other motives for those. There are robberies gone bad. There are intimate partner and domestic related where one person knows the other. As you've seen, we've even had family members kill family members inside of the home most recently. So we have an increase in shootings and murders, but there's no evidence that there's a displacement for group violence related, which is a very, very distinct motive type.
I appreciate that, and I want to move on to my colleagues, and so we can start. But I want to make one more point. Just as a data guy, I was sort of going through, looking through your slides, and this is the first time it really kind of jumped out to me when we're comparing this year to last year. Last year was our second worst year in the last 5 years, since 2017. To note that change or reduction, and to note it as being so significant specifically for homicides, we had 52 homicides last year. We had 42 in 2020. We had 32 this year so far. There's a significant difference between a 20 homicide gap, still a significant difference, but not nearly as notable from 42 to 32. It would be helpful when we're talking about these numbers to understand how this year compares against the trend and not just last year, knowing that last year was a peak year in homicides. So with that, I just want to make that point, and I want to hand off to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 questions. One of them goes in the same line of questioning that you had started with, Mr. Chair. Part of my district is in Northeast, and we have seen a significant rise in homicides and shootings. And I will agree with the commissioner on the point of what I understand from those instances. In some cases, somebody came back from a long time away, whether it's jail or something else, and came back and they're doing the same thing. And that's been very frustrating for the neighborhood. And in some cases, if I understand the data correctly, it's domestic. However, I did want to just ask this part of the question. What I'm understanding the director and the commissioner to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't any instances that you know of where someone is saying, oh my God, there's so many people in the Western District, they're all over us, they, aren't letting us do our thing, so we're gonna move up to some place where they're not doing it. There's no evidence that that's happening?
There's no evidence of displacement. And so what I will say, and I'll invite anybody to jump in, when it comes to group violence and grouping gang violence, whether we call it a gang or not, that's usually very territorial. Now, while there are connections to violence that certainly cross boundaries, because obviously criminals don't respect or even regard boundaries, group territory is usually unique to a spatial geographic area. And so usually that doesn't move. Their criminal acts move, but that doesn't move. And so I would say the likelihood of individuals saying, let's just take our activity and we will move from Western to Northeastern, that doesn't happen. Are there instances where things happen in Western and they see a person they want to attack somewhere else in the city and they take their actions out in that area? Perhaps that does happen from time to time. But no, group activity is usually very territorial and usually doesn't move. And what we're seeing is, while there is an increase, it's an increase, but it's in multiple motives. It's not just group violence. It's an increase in the number of people who know one another, the number of people who know one another and are intimate, it's family members, and it's robberies gone bad. And some of it could be grouping violence, but it is not because it's been displaced because of what's happening in Western.
Okay, thank you for that more detailed explanation. I appreciate it.
One thing I can add too is that if we were going to see the displacement in the Western, we most likely would have seen it in the Southwest.
Sure.
But the Southwest is also down. So, and we know that through our group violence meetings, that this tells us how everyone was correct when we moved to the Southwest. When we put up all the NIBIN hits, for all the shootings and homicides in the Northern where we get shell casings, more of them come back to the South. I mean, in the Western, more of them come back to the Southwest. And then for all the ones in the Southwest, more come back to the Western. So that's where we would have seen the displacement. It would have went right to the Southwest, but both districts are down. And then as far as the Northeast, I know if you look at the slide that we put up, for the homicides are 40, 34, 33, 39, and then last year it hits 20, and then it's back up to 43. So being a commander there, 20 that 20 is extremely low for the Northeast District, considering the population and the historical violence. So just a little context on that one. But the displacement, if we'd have saw it in the Western, would have been right to the Southwest.
Yeah, we were very
Very low,
yeah, the change in Northeast last year was significant.
Yes.
So, I know other commanders in the Northeast, former commanders are also in the room, so that's a testament to them as well. So my second question is about, I'm excited to see that gun arrests are up 20%, but that doesn't mean we're getting every single gun off the street. I'm very, very concerned still that we have guns are coming back still into our city, whether it's through ghost guns or whether it's through, trafficking. And, our officers are working extremely hard to get these guns off the street, but we absolutely, and I'll just say it again because I say it in every hearing, we need to make sure we're doing something to try to curb the trafficking because I just cannot have, again, our 15-year-olds having guns and anybody having illegal guns. So I think the last time we talked about it, there's obviously partnerships happening with our federal partners and our state partners, regional partners as well, because this is a I-95 corridor thing. And then we do have some officers dedicated to that. Is that still the case? And is there
That is still
anything
the
else?
case. They are assigned to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they are doing that work to help not only track where guns are coming from, but hold offenders responsible who are helping facilitate. You know that we know that like 50% of all guns come in from other parts of the state outside of the city, and the rest come from around the country, the other 49 states. We were just at a conference with chiefs from around the country who are all talking about the same thing. There are guns coming into the cities from everywhere but that city. Yes, we're absolutely doing that work. But I think the point we really want to make that, yes, we will always try to find where they're coming from and try to stop the flow of illegal guns, done through partnership with state and federal partners. But the men and women of the Baltimore Police Department got more guns off the street this year than we did when we had 600 more officers in 2014.
No, I mean,
So
they've been working
we
very hard.
Took
Absolutely.
an exponentially higher number of guns off the street and made more arrests for those guns than we did when we actually had 600 more cops to do the same work. I could not be more proud of that effort. Why is it not translating into some other reduction? Well, that's a
Larger issue.
That's a long conversation to have on another day.
Right.
Not that I'm asking you to call me back to have it.
Don't worry, we will.
We will, don't worry. No, and I appreciate that. We've seen our officers working so hard on this. But they're working so hard on it, and it seems like they're a hamster on a wheel if we can't get the guns from, prevent the guns from coming in. So I'm clear that, whatever you need from us, to advocate for that, I think that's important. I have one last question, but I know you wanted to do a round, or do you want me to take it real quick?
Just let's get to our colleagues and we can come
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, Director, and the entire team. Commissioner and Eric, I'm going to talk a little bit about the consent decree. When I talk about the consent decree in community, there's an overwhelmingly negative association that most of my constituents have toward it. And it sort of falls into two camps. One is folks who say this is a huge money pit, and there's a law firm, there are people who've made a lot of profit off of it, but we don't actually see or understand what the product that's been delivered to the city of Baltimore is. And the second camp will say something to the effect of this handcuffs our cops or doesn't disables them from doing what they need to do effective police work. And Commissioner, I know what your response, at least to that second preposition is, and it's one that I share, which is that if you can't behave in a way that's not brutal and that doesn't violate the Constitution, then you probably shouldn't be a police officer. However, it remains a major problem that Baltimoreans do not associate the consent decree with positive reductions in either crime or really dramatic improvements in relationships between community and police. And so while I am not advocating for the dissolution of our consent decree, as I know New Orleans has certainly taken a look at, I am very concerned about the continued use of our very precious tax dollars to support it. And I wonder, from your perspective, is this primarily a messaging problem? Is this primarily we have not publicly explained it clear enough? Because it is a huge challenge for us to defend something when folks just don't feel it on the ground.
Thank you, Councilman. All of the above. All of the above. There are certainly ways we could do a better job explaining it. What I will say is we are a totally different police department than we were when we started. we're a totally police department than we are when I started. We are doing better work. You just heard us talk about taking more guns off the street than we did when we had 600 more cops. And we did that with using less force, with fewer complaints, with less litigation. And so we are doing the very same work without receiving the complaints of not only brutality, but just uses of force in general. And we're doing it without the complaints of unconstitutionality, that we did it in an unconstitutional way. And so this is a very different department. Let me be the first to say we still have a long way to go. First to admit it, still have a long way to go. But we have turned the corner and we are light years away from where we were. The Constitution has not changed. State law has not changed. An officer can do now what an officer always was able to do. All we ask now is that what the consent decree makes us demonstrate and prove to the monitors, the DOJ and the judge, that we do it in a constitutional way. And it's a process improvement. And it is not directly tied to crime reduction. It is directly tied to infrastructure building, process improvement that, when done correctly, will inevitably address and improve community relations, which inevitably will help with all the other things when we talk about crime. So it's tied to it, but not directly. I will say that because the Constitution has never changed, nor has the law, we can do what we always were allowed to do. We just did it wrong at a certain point. And we're now asking officers to do it right. And we're making them prove to us that they are doing it right. So when you hear things like I'm being handcuffed or it's not allowing me to do my job, that is, you've heard my response in the past. I don't have to repeat it. That is absolutely not true, because there has been no change in the law or the Constitution. All we did is create policy to say, let's follow it and let's do it the correct way. And by the way, we're going to audit, inspect, and assess to make sure that we are.
And if I could piggyback off of that, I mean, part of why we're moving into the assessment phases now is for the exact reason that I think a lot of folks are wondering, where is the exit to this decree? Where is it that we get to the department and having an outcome-based assessment that knows that we are now changing how we operate? I mean, a couple of things I mentioned earlier was a statistic on releases without charges. This is when an officer's efforts to arrest somebody is ultimately met with some decision that there wasn't sufficient evidence or there wasn't a correct procedural method done, and ultimately results in their being released from incarceration without any charge whatsoever. Those were in the hundreds of instances per quarter and per year prior to the consent decree. Now it's in the single digits, and in those instances, it's most often because of prosecutorial discretion, just choosing to null pros the case. So procedural justice is the other piece of this, making sure that we're having quality interactions every single time, measuring it, making it self-assessing, self-correcting. It's how you build the relationships. It's how you ensure that those folks are coming to us when we need to solve cases and solve crimes, and that they trust the department. Creating processes to ensure our officers are held accountable by the public when misconduct is identified, and making sure that we've got the processes in place to ensure those are properly handled and measured in a way. We have to be the self-correcting, self-assessing agency that makes it so that we are a world-class department, because that's what the residents of Baltimore deserve. We have done a significant number of investments to get us there, but our focus now, and the judge's focus now, let's be very clear, is to move into that assessment phase, is to making sure that we are making certain that everything is being done to provide the information necessary to our monitors so that we can ultimately exit the decree once we have shown substantial compliance in all of these sections. We do have one of the most extensive consent decrees in the country for a reason, as the commissioner intoned. We have to get to good on those things, and we have to make the investments to ensure that we are able to demonstrate that compliance, because it's what the people of Baltimore need to ensure that they have confidence in the department going forward. So that's how we would, and we do need to message it better. And we recognize that. And I think for us, it's giving you all the necessary information and language. That's why we're trying to present it here today. And anything you need from us to help us explain that, we are at your disposal to ensure that your constituents, and indeed all of the folks who live and reside and visit Baltimore, know where we are and how far we have yet to go to making sure they know what that means.
I appreciate that. When I taught in West Baltimore, what I saw too often was officers throw young people up against the wall, search their backpack, often lacking in probable cause. It was brutal, it was wrong, and it needed to end. And that is an unfortunate part of our history. What I hear and see too often now is folks have a sense that many of our officers are disengaged and that there is too much sitting in the car, there's too much on the cell phone, there's too much just lack of interaction, lack of engagement. I know that you all are pushing foot patrol. I know that you are pushing business checks, but my concern, again, is that it's not translating all the way down the chain. And so it creates a situation where folks look at a consent decree, which is an expensive document to implement, and some of the concern ends up, maybe to use the word, displaced onto the consent decree. That remains my concern with the department currently.
Yeah, we hear those complaints. We, as I travel around town, as we all travel around, going to roll calls, going to community members, we hear what you hear. Sometimes maybe even more so, because it's us that they're complaining about. So they, the people are very willing to tell us what they see. And yes, we address that all the time. A culture that went from what you just described to a culture of disengage altogether. And now we recognize that early on because we heard those complaints all the way back to my first day. To make sure we, number one, develop training to teach officers what they can do instead of always telling officers what they can't do. And many times in consent decrees, it's all about bad messaging about what you can't do. And that gets translated to I'm handcuffed, I can't do my job. We are working and have for a long time been working about what you can do. And let's get away from this talk about what we can't do, because the consent decree doesn't tell us what we can't do. It only says just follow the Constitution and the law, by the way, again, which has not changed. The same thing we taught officers, we still teach them. But we wanted to make sure that, so every member has been trained in stop, searches, and arrests, in use of force, constitutional policing, bias-free policing. We've put on that training. Now it's about how we supervise, manage, and lead to motivate them to go out and do that work. How to engage, with whom to engage, and for what reasons to engage. And we spend a lot of time on that. Now I'll pass it to the deputy to finish up.
Yes, sir. And like with a lot of the officers, things that I used to have to do and take into the station, the officer can now do when he's sitting in his car. He may be sitting there typing up a report on his computer that he just finished. So he's sitting in the neighborhood, still with the presence, but he's taking care of his administrative work. He could be calling the hot desk to call in a vehicle. If he has the license plate reader, he could be sitting there waiting for a hit to come up for a car that's going by, just monitoring the traffic. And people think that he's not doing anything.
And if I could, they can also write the report on the phone now. We just implemented that as a piece of the technology integration for our records management system. They could do that on their cell phone.
And if you look at our vehicles and our equipment and our infrastructure, we got a new case management system. We have new vehicles. We have more LPRs than we've ever had. I don't think we would have had a lot of that stuff without the consent decree. So it has provided our officers better equipment, and it's going to continue to improve officers. And one of the best things it's provided us is given us better training than we've ever had.
As a matter of time, I want to make sure we begin to close on this response.
Yes,
because
the thing we see and hear about them sitting in the car is the very same thing we've asked them to do, because now everything, instead of going back to the station to do everything is done right there on that computer in the car. All reports are written, the case management, the records management, and now from the phone. So much of what we used to ask them to go back to the station to do, we're now asking them to do from the car.
So out of respect, I'm going to move on, but final point on this is that I don't think that's the message that communities receive when there's an officer on their phone in their car. Yes. Director Jackson, you often speak about co-producing public safety, which is a critical component of GVRS and CVI, and I genuinely appreciate the commitment to pulling in partners from all over the city and embedding the work in our communities, because we know that Baltimore has amazing community partners and that they need to be a part of the anti-violence work that we do. I was concerned to read, I think it was today's Baltimore Banner, about what they described as a conflict with ROCA. ROCA, of course, is the organization. It was originally in Massachusetts, and then I believe Mayor Pugh brought it here to Baltimore. They provide cognitive behavioral therapy. They work with some of our most disadvantaged and at times criminally involved kids in our city. And I've seen with a couple of young people in my district some very, very, very effective work. And so was hoping to understand from you directly what's going on with them and whether we are still working in partnership.
I was concerned to read it too. I think that the classifications or the categorizations were that there was a rift or a dispute with Monsi. And I don't agree with those categorizations. I would categorize what's going on as contract negotiations associated with ROCA, CVI, and potentially its GVRS referral work. And to be quite candid, feel it inappropriate and imprudent for me to conduct contract negotiations through a newspaper. So there have been ongoing conversations with ROCA as a partner because just as I read, they want to continue to partner with us, just as you all read, we want to continue to partner with them. We do believe that they are valuable partners. And at the same time, in order to effectively scale up this strategy, and as we've heard the chair mention quite frequently because he was around the last time this strategy was attempted as a member of the administration, we've got to make sure that we honor the fidelity of the strategy. This is an academically proven strategy, and so all service providers are going to be required to follow that model because it's what we've committed to Baltimore City that we needed to do to get right this time. And so continuing contract negotiations with ROCA and hopeful that we'll make sure that that partnership continues. I will say, just to be clear, that the referrals that have been made to ROCA through the pilot continue to be folks that they are working with. While no new referrals have been made because we are in the midst of contract negotiations, it is my hope that we will we'll be able to continue to partner with them on this strategy.
Appreciate that. You know, it is my contention, and I believe yours as well, that we need every partner at the table together working on this, and that ROCA brings a skill set and YAP brings a skill set, and that there are so many different folks in our ecosystem, but to lose one would be clearly deeply unfortunate. And so I appreciate that we are in negotiation with them and look forward to seeing that resolved expeditiously.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So my first question is there's been a lot of consternation from folks across the city about rideshare usage, car thefts, carjacking. Some very disturbing, frankly, incidents have been occurring across the city of Baltimore, and I know I've had a few. I don't think the ones in my district have been associated with ride shares, but have had a few attempted carjackings in the far western part of my district, the West Hills neighborhood in particular. Can you, I guess, give us a synopsis of what you're seeing, what the strategy is, what the response is going to be? As we know, a lot of people utilize this to get around. This is a form of transportation, and if folks don't feel unsafe, both the drivers and the passengers, you know, something has to give on this end. First part of the question. Second part of the question is, what is the communication with the rideshare companies? Is there any sort of intervention that they're recommending, or are they seeing this in other parts of the country? Just trying to get a full picture of what's happening with this.
Basically, what we're seeing throughout the city is there's a couple different things going on. Right now, we know we have a pattern going on where we have several young individual suspects who are taking over the ride share, and then they were taking the ride share and picking up customers and then robbing the customers. We've made 9 arrests in 5 different cases. 2 of the cases in Baltimore County, 3 of the cases are in Baltimore City. Almost every one of those individuals were arrested before by us for a carjacking. And all of them are young men and women under the age of 18. We have communicated publicly to everyone about when you order a ride share, make sure you have the correct car, but more importantly, make sure you have the correct driver, that the driver is there. I would recommend that they communicate with the driver to make sure that they're showing up. But there's also different things where they are getting a ride, somebody's using a ride share. At the end of the ride share, they're committing a robbery on the ride share driver. So that falls, unfortunately, that occurs. The driver can be as careful as he can. He can call back, or she can call back to confirm that it is the right phone number or the right person, and then just report that as quickly as possible. We move as quickly as we can with these vehicles to track them. That's how we were able to make the arrest, and we are working with the FBI to assist us with the prosecution of these individuals so that we can keep them behind bars and we don't deal with this pattern, because it seems to be the same individuals that come up with a different pattern every several months because we've locked them up and they're coming right back out of the system.
Yep, so to dovetail what the DC was saying, so we've instituted a while ago a carjacking and robbery protocol. So those districts that are experiencing anything that would appear to be part of these patterns of either vehicle-involved robberies or carjackings, immediately an individual officer is to notify our dispatcher that this vehicle is involved. That is given out citywide broadcast, so now everyone within the city is aware of these potential vehicles involved. One of the issues that the DC alluded to is because part of the pattern are individual suspects using voice over IP through either the computers, where there's not actually a phone number associated with it. It's a computer-aided phone that is calling these rideshare services. So we're having to do some technology walkbacks in reference to identifying these individuals. So we are working with not only our ID department, but with our federal partners in identifying this. As the DC said, 9 individuals so far. What we have done is created an initiative amongst the east side and the west side through my deputy chiefs in reference to having individual patrol officers form teams in reference to these problematic areas and situations we've been having in reference to this increase in carjackings and robberies. And we have seen significant increases in not only arrests, but those handgun arrests that you were talking about.
And we have communicated with Lyft, both Lyft and Uber. Our public information office has done that. We've put out a video to help the citizens to basically help them when they order these ride shares, because there are thousands of ride shares that take place throughout the city. It's a small, unfortunately, fortunately, it's a small anomaly, but those are the ones that become dangerous for the individual person, either.
Mainstream and social media.
Yes, yes, sir. Through the mainstream and social media, we've put everything out that we can. Every time we have a pattern like that, we try to go public as quickly as we can to let the citizens know, here's what we're seeing, here's the precautions you can take to be the most cautious you can when you're engaging in a rideshare.
Has there been a commitment from the companies to increase, I guess, the communication with customers? Maybe there's an additional pop-up. I mean, when I saw this pattern popping up, I did talk to my staff at least and some family members that, look, before you get in the car, I mean, that's something that I've been doing the whole time. Just make sure I'm getting in the right car, but and the right driver, right tag number. Have they made any commitments to increasing or sort of reminding people to do that? Or, when the app pops up, I haven't used the rideshare in a little while, but has there been any sort of additional communication via the apps?
Yes, the vendors have basically cooperated and said they are putting the tips out to the drivers. Plus, the drivers see it and they experience, and hopefully they're watching the news and using the precautions as well. But the vendors are putting those tips out to their drivers to use caution, and there are things that they can follow up on before they take and pick up a customer.
Okay. Secondly, I had a question for Director Jackson, and this is actually more of a statement. So I saw in your presentation you mentioned obviously a huge part of the ecosystem is victim services. Has there been conversation about sort of pulling all of that under MONSE? And I know I've said, my staff, we often have to play this like sort of shell game where we're like, sometimes we're calling the state's attorney's office, sometimes we're calling MONSE. The health department I know has a violence response. Has there been conversation? BPD has a victim services response. So it's sort of like a very sort of confusing ecosystem. I know for my office, I would imagine probably the same for the actual victims to not know like where to go. Like you almost need a case manager to sort of walk you through. Is there a conversation about sort of pulling us all in and just sort of having one central space that people can go to if they've been a victim of any type of violent crime?
I would offer that there are a few conversations going on, given a recent presentation by Heather Warnkin and other community-based partners associated with the Victim Services Assessment. MONSE's working in partnership with not only BPD and the Health Department, but also with the State's Attorney's Office to make sure that we address the recommendations that came out of that report. In addition to that, Mayor Scott has charged MONSE with providing him with a proposal around what makes the most sense with regard to integrating services. What that looks like is to be seen. We are in the process of drafting a proposal for presentation to the mayor before the end of the year, but ultimately he'll be the one making the decision.
Okay, yeah, understood. And that's just something I'd love to see happen. I do a lot of work on the human trafficking side, and there's like a human trafficking hotline, like there's the Blue Dot campaign, like there's very specific places that we can point people to. I'd love to see the same thing for victim services. So has my support. I'm happy to touch base with the mayor as well to see if that's something that we can better advocate for on this end. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. We'll try to get through a quick round of questions. I'll be very brief with mine. I actually want to follow up with a line of questioning that Councilman Cohen had with regard to ROCA and the story in the paper this morning. Director Jackson, can you tell me what is ROCA's current agreement with the city, and how much money do they receive right now to do that?
ROCA currently has no agreement with the city. Their 4-year contract that started back in 2018 for about $5 million. I think the article says $2.5 million. It was actually $5 million, expired on June 30th of this year. With that said, MONSE, because we value the partnership with ROCA, did make a specific budgetary request for them to be included in our budget for this fiscal year. That budget amount is roughly $900,000, and that is the contract that we are currently negotiating.
I see. So no current agreement, no current contract, and their previous agreement was before GVRS, and so I guess we're discussing whether or not they're going to be a part of GVRS. Is that what you're saying?
So the 2018 contract happened when Mayor Catherine Pugh was the mayor, and so GVRS was not a strategy. There was no such thing as an emerging CVI ecosystem. And so we are in, again, contract negotiations to determine what ROCA's obligations under that contract will be.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say, knowing that the work that they do, they are a really important partner, and I'm probably one of the most experienced in this kind of work. I really hope we can figure out how we're going to work that out. I've been working with those folks in my district and see the way they can actually interact with some of our young people on the edge. I'm really concerned about that, and just really want to make sure we work that out.
Understood.
Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about compliance. You all signed the MOU with JHPD to create the JHPD. They are now obligated to create their force and comply with the consent decree. We're in year 6 of the consent decree. They are in year -2, right? Because they haven't even put their force together. There is no accountability other than the accountability board. And because the city is obligated to make sure that the consent decree is done, how are we making sure that JHU PD is actually complying with the consent decree, because in the new MOU, which is not so new, it actually looks almost exactly the same as the draft, they are still going to have to, they will have to do the training. And yet we have just gone through this whole thing of creating, you know, almost the greatest training in the world is what I hear. How they think they can do better makes no sense to me. So I want to know a little bit more about how are we then going to get those reports. And I wouldn't even mind about this if they were staying on their campus. But because there are joint jurisdiction streets that they're going to be in our neighborhoods, which, by the way, there's still not clarity as to whether or not they just get to sit in front of their property, or if a call comes in, they can go to an adjacent property that's public property, because in 2 sessions that we had with them, there were 2 different answers. So if they were on their campus proper, didn't matter to me. They're on our community streets. They're actually going to be interacting with our residents. How is that supposed to work? Because I think we just put the city in a huge, huge bind in terms of being able to comply with the consent decree.
I'll start, but I'll let the deputy finish. Well, first of all, they are compelled to comply with the terms of the MOU. They are, in the terms of the MOU, they are subject to comply with the policies that are created by them, some of which they will follow suit with the Baltimore Police Department's policy, but they are not a party to the consent decree.
Except that the state legislation was very clear. The state enabling legislation says that they will comply with the consent decree. That's what it says.
So to give clarity on that, I mean, part of what we're trying to make sure of is that the enabling legislation and the MOU, which governs our relationship, absolutely requires that they implement national best practices on use of force, de-escalation, misconduct cases and how it's handled. All of that mirrors, you know, hand in glove what the department has implemented over the last several 5 or 6 years. And I think part of what there is an opportunity for is to build a department from the ground up with those policies in place, and to make certain that they are not starting from a place where we started prior to the consent decree, right? So they have to be autonomous to a degree. They have to be able to run their own organization and not really pull from our resources to train their officers. But we have a committed partnership with them to be able to leverage every policy, every training curriculum, anything they need to be able to adhere to the MOU. And I would state, we added that language, due in large part to the feedback we heard from all the public, from you, Councilwoman. I think it was important for us to acknowledge that we're building a culture of an agency from day one. And that opportunity exists to ensure that we set the right tone from the beginning. And so we added that language. That was something we wanted to make certain was part of the DNA of this department from the ground up. And if they don't adhere to that, it's subject to a revocation of the MOU. That we built that language into as well. This is on top of cultural sensitivity training, from which they have now agreed to implement for their officers. And I think part of it is how do we find that balance from, you know, being on the hook for BPD to train their officers, and that's a resource drain for us, versus setting the model, the national standard, which frankly, as you've said, and as we know, BPD is now that standard for training and policy. So that is where we landed with the process. The commissioner is right; they're not a party to the consent decree. However, the pieces of the puzzle that make the consent decree possible and work, things like body-worn cameras, things like reporting out, stop searches and arrests, these are all policies and programs that we will have the ability from BPD to audit and inspect through the MOU. And we're committed to having that relationship on an ongoing basis because, you know, part of it is us enabling them to have that law enforcement capacity in the city of Baltimore. And we have to be a party to that. And we have our responsibility for that as well, which we're committed to.
And if I could just add one other piece, part of your question was saying that there is no accountability and there's nothing that could be further from the truth. Just like we are beholden to all of the standards that are in HB 670, so is JHPD. So they have to do annual reporting. They have to comply with the charging committee. They have to go through trial boards. They have to follow the matrix. So there is just as much accountability for them as there is for us, the sheriff's department, every other police department that is had in other universities. So I want to be very clear.
Just to be
about
clear,
that.
the same accountability measures that have been implemented for BP are the exact same ones holding the officers at JHPD accountable. It's the
I think
exact
what
same.
I was referring to was more around the public accountability process. So yes, if there's an incident, which there better not be, because you know what I will do, but if there is an incident, then, you know, people can complain through the PAB, and that's, you know, how it will be. And once we set up the PAB and that whole system. What I'm referring to is more around, sure, they can do the annual reporting and all of that, and then there's the accountability board. But the accountability board, you know, I'm just talking about the sort of public accountability. Like, you just gave us this great matrix of where we are in the consent decree. Are they going to give us a great matrix about how they're doing in terms of their compliance? Are they going to be able to, are they going to be that transparent so that the members of the accountability board plus the council can ask those questions?
Councilwoman, we are at 2:30.
So that's okay. This is probably a larger conversation.
This is certainly a larger conversation. I want to thank you, and I apologize for having to cut it off because we
That's
do
okay.
have to prepare for our city council meeting coming right after this, and they have to turn over the room. That said, you know, this is our last meeting of the year, and every year we have, you know, sometimes a difficult responsibility of looking back at what we've done and where we are, and sometimes we have good years and sometimes we don't have good years. It looks like we're going to be about where we were last year, and not for lack of effort, I wouldn't suggest that, but I think clearly there's something missing here, and it's really, really important that we get it right, and I think you know, it is our committee, it is our responsibility to ask you guys questions, to hold you accountable, to make sure that they're good questions, and I hope that the questions here today were good questions. I think they were, so that we're being smarter about what we do next year. So with that, you know, happy holidays, happy New Year, because I hope I don't see you guys before the New Year, but hope to see you all at the beginning of the year with a lot more energy and a lot more intensity in the work that we do, because Baltimore needs it. Thank you.
Well, happy holidays to you and to all the members of the City Council. We all wish you very prosperous and safe holidays, and for you and your families.